Hey, you should be listening to us on the Newsly app. Just visit newsly.me to download today and listen to the entire internet, including podcasts like this one. You can also check out our conversation with founder Yanni, Season 3, Episode 8.
This episode is powered by Airdrie DQ Grill and Chill, owned and operated by local entrepreneurs. Check out one of their 3 Airdrie locations today and pick up a blizzard, ice cream cake, or dilly bar. The Biz Dojo is also brought to you by Beyond a Beaten Path. If you're on the lookout for a personalized gift, head to beyondabeatenpath.ca and get started on your custom creation. Beyond a Beaten Path. Personalize it, because everything else is boring.
So what I'm starting to get a sense of in our journey here with coaching is not everyone necessarily understands what a coach is or does, or the training they've gone through, or the value they bring.
It's a tough thing to box in, although I would say most professions are really. Like, I think as humans, we like to compartmentalize and be like, oh, that's what that is, or that's how that goes. And I think what I've learned through my own personal experience, and I'll just even say the last 9 months, like this year, basically, I guess 10 months, is part of my aversion to coaching has been, I'm thinking of Cartman right now, but like, I do what I want. Like, people don't like being told what to do, I think, generally. Like, because I don't know, that conjures up all kinds of feelings of being wrong or whatever. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned about coaching, the most effective coaching I've ever experienced, had nothing to do with anyone telling me what to do.
Really honest, good coaching is not at all telling you what to do.
There is a type of like a behavioral coaching.
Oh, yes.
Like, it's still coaching. It's just, when I think about, what motivates me or what motivates you or motivates anyone, it's our thoughts and feelings. And you think something, then you feel something, and then you do something. And I think where I've had challenges with coaching, let's just say the first 30 some years of my life, was a lot of it was behavior based. Like, hey, don't do that, or hey, do more of that, or, just very, very focused on, the very last domino in that, is that a triad? I guess. Sure. I don't know. There's 3 dominoes in this analogy. That's the last one.
So yes, it would be a triad then.
Yeah,
there's 3. So, I didn't know how many dominoes there were. So
no, I think there's 3. There might be more, but I think we'll stick with 3. Nice and simple for everyone. And for me, when I started working with a coach, and it's interesting because I was reflecting on this the other day. It wasn't like, I had this profound moment where it's like, oh my God, this person has all these credentials and they've done all this stuff and whatever. Literally, it all started from him asking me a question and being curious, and then sort of creating this space where I just started, A, tapping into my inner wisdom, and then B, I kind of took the lessons, the learnings, the conversation, and then I went and did something with it in my life. Like, if I were to boil it down to its simplest components, that's really what's been happening. But it's been life-changing. Like, those actions, those behaviors, those habits, those things that show up every day have completely changed. But it all started with thoughts and feelings.
We are, as humans, very good at, like you were saying, covering it up and saying, oh, I've got this. Like, I don't need coaching because I can handle this. And then inevitably what happens is people get to a point where they're like, I could probably use a hand better understanding why I got here or how I got here. And hopefully they get to that point, because some people don't, and they never really uncover the truth, which allows them to uncover where they could take themselves.
Yeah. Well, I think, we get into it in this episode. I don't know if it's in so the exciting thing. This is our first 2-part episode. And I haven't listened to it yet, so I'm not sure if it's in the first part or the second part. But I really, and it's also in Jamie's book. So Jamie Smart is our guest. Obviously, you've seen that when you clicked on the listen part of the episode.
Or if you're an innocent bystander sitting in a car listening along, please download this and make sure you catch part 2 later when you're not driving with whoever is gracing you with our presence.
But I really love the analogy where the drunk guy is looking for his keys under the light, and they're like, "Oh, where'd you drop your keys?" He's like, 2 blocks over. Why are you looking here? Well, the light's better here. And it's like, it sounds ridiculous, but how often? I mean, I've been there, right? Like,
I think we all have.
why can't I get the job I want, or the whatever, any list of things that I want this, but I'm not even actually looking for it. I'm over here focused on this other thing that's not even anything to do with that thing.
Yeah, it was, there are a ton of those in this conversation. I have listened to it as the person who puts together the final edit. I have had a chance to listen to it, and it is like, it was so good to just talk to him. I think it was even better to sit and listen to it as a silent observer the second time through, because there's so many things to pick up on, and Jamie's just so easy to talk to. Everything was very deep, but it was an open conversation. I loved it.
Yeah, you know what I keep thinking of? It was such an amazing opportunity to get to sit and talk with him. Like, I'm still like, I don't know, I'm still jacked up about that part. But like, as I was just sitting there watching, and again, we're worlds away. He's over in England, we're in Canada, and every time he would kind of go deep into thought and he would start to talk about something, he would just close his eyes and he would just like, he was summoning up all of his like inner thoughts and feelings. And like, I don't know, it was just like this whole other level of like presence and inner wisdom, like some Jedi Yoda level conversation. That's how I left it feeling.
You could literally see, like, people talk about mindfulness in meetings and they use all those sorts of terms, especially these days. It becomes more and more of a thing as more and more corporate environments get involved in mindset and mindfulness. That is the first time I will say that I have experienced true mindful focus on a conversation and providing an answer to not even a question, because it was just a conversation. It was just, we were just spitballing on things, and he would just go into this zone, and I didn't even know what to say after half the time.
It was really special, and I think I don't know. I want to get to that Yoda zone. Like,
Seth's just started randomly closing his eyes as he does things to see if he can summon the beast within.
If you want to tap into your inner wisdom, you just kind of slow everything down and just be quiet. And I think if you listen close enough, whatever it is that is giving you stress or worry or concern, you probably have an answer to it, or at least a step forward that you can take if you can find that inner wisdom.
Well, and I think that ties back to how we started this conversation. Jamie is a master level coach, and we both hope to be at that level one day, to your point. But that is what a coach brings to the table. They help you find that moment of clarity where you can sit and you can close your eyes and really focus on something internally so that you can find the answer, so that all the other noise goes away.
Well, and I think that's one of the common, questions is, what's the difference between like coaching and therapy, for example? And I mean, therapy can be highly valuable for people. And, if that's the road you want to go down, that, totally cool. But coaching is very future focused versus going back to the past and sort of, dealing with trauma or digging into what might have happened and sorting through all that. It's more about like, where do you want to go? How are you going to get there? What is, how do you kind of create your own future? And one of the things I love about, or that I've learned about coaching is, life is like a balance beam. And it's like, how do you, and you're constantly going to be knocked off balance. That's been the biggest experience for me through coaching and being coached, is learning that I already have the tools that I need to stay on the balance beam, to stay focused, to not correct, but to tap into myself and figure out what I need to stay on the balance beam in a given moment, or get back on in a given moment. And, a thought to ponder, if you build on that analogy for yourself, is, when was the last time you felt in balance? Welcome to the Biz Dojo with Seth and JP. This week, we're joined by Jamie Smart. Jamie is the best-selling author of the book Clarity, as well as a world-renowned coach and based in England. So welcome to the dojo, Jamie.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no, this is a real treat, really special for me. So I'd reached out via email a few weeks back, and JP and I have been doing this. We call it shooting shots, just people that inspire us for a variety of reasons. And you were one of those people for me where I told JP, I'm like, I'm going to shoot a shot with Jamie Smart and see what happens. And here we are. So I just want to start off by thanking you for your time and tell you that you honestly, your teddy bear video changed my life.
Oh, wow. That's cool. That's cool. How did that happen? Like, what was it that you saw or heard or realized that had such an impact for you? Because that's like a 5-minute video, right?
It's a 5-minute video, and it's not even the whole video. It's just the part when I connected that every thought that I have comes from inside of me, inside of my psychological capacity. And like, just something about it in that video, the way that you explained it and the whole teddy bear analogy, it just clicked. And ever since that day, I just see life differently. I'm just like, oh, like that's coming from inside of me. It has nothing to do with this external circumstance, whatever it is, good, bad, or otherwise. And so I've been spreading the good word of the teddy bear video. I think I've shared it with like 100 people at this point. And maybe we just start there. Like, when did you figure that out? Like, what was the moment in your life when you're like, oh, all my thoughts come from inside of me?
Well, I didn't figure it out. This is the funny thing. So I'd been, my background, I was an IT project manager doing, organizational change programs. And then I went on a training course by influence skills back in the late 1990s. And I had an insight that weekend, which is like, oh, I want to do this. I want to work with people. I want to coach people. I want to train people. So I quit my job a couple of weeks later and I retrained as an NLP trainer. So I built an NLP training business and did all that. And I was good at that and I enjoyed it, but something wasn't quite right. And so I went, I read a book called The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. And I was like, oh, that's it. I need to basically go on mini retirements and go on adventures around the world, and then I'll be happy. I'll go powder skiing in Kathmandu, or I'll do this, and then I'll be so successful that I'll be very happy. So I organized my business to take my first mini retirement, which was a 3-month ski holiday in Whistler in Canada. I was like, this is going to be fantastic. So I was a Whistler, and kind of 6 weeks in, I was kind of like, this isn't it either. And I couldn't understand it because according kind of to the rules of my industry, I should be so happy. I've got work I enjoy. I'm on a ski holiday. I should be, I'm living the dream externally. So why don't I feel like it? What's missing? So I went back to the drawing board. I hired a coach, and my coach, unbeknownst to me, had started looking in the direction of what's sometimes called the inside out understanding, what I refer to as the principles behind clarity, or subtractive psychology. It's a set of principles discovered by a guy called Sidney Banks, who's dead now, but he realized that our experience is being created from within. And by the way, this is backed up by old neuroscience. A guy called Hermann Helmholtz discovered this in the 1850s. He's like the granddaddy of neuroscience. And he's like, yeah, no, our perception of the world is induced. We're moment to moment, like even as we sit here right now, we're receiving data via our senses and then taking a guess at what's going on in the world. So this stuff's supported by the neuroscience, right? So I started looking at this stuff and I was like, no, it's more complicated than that. It's not as simple as that. But then one day I was like, oh, my first insight was like, oh no, this is it. Everything you've been looking for outside of yourself is already there within you. It's being created from within. Now I went from not knowing that to knowing that like you know your own name, because what happened was something that's happened for you, Seth, was I had a realization. Now, a realization is just an internal system update. It adjusts our perception and brings it closer to reality. And we've all been doing that our whole lives. Like it's part of the core learning process for human beings. So we all have this innate capacity for insight and realization. And we're using it all the time, where it's kind of an unrecognized capacity. But so I had an insight. It's like, oh, everything you've been looking for outside of you is already there within you. I was like, whoa, well, that explained why I couldn't find it at Whistler, and why I couldn't find it in the business success and all that stuff. I'd been looking in the wrong place. Now, here's the funny thing. I'd heard that for years because I'd explored spiritual teaching, and everyone says, oh yeah, the kingdom of heaven is within. Yeah, I get it now. Now, where am I going to find it? It's like, well, you've already got it. You've already got it. And so that was my first insight. Second insight into this stuff. Well, it was funny, actually. So I'd had that first insight. I was like, oh, wow, this changes everything. I was part of a men's group. And so my buddies were around one night, and at the end of our session, I said, hey, guys, could I talk to you about this new stuff I'm learning? And they're like, sure. And so I talked to them about this stuff for a little while. And then during that, I had another realization. I realized, oh, wow, the fact that a person can even see, hear, feel, perceive, the fact that someone's even having a human experience means they have this source of clarity and realization and resilience and transformation already there within them. They've already got it. Well, as a coach and as a trainer, that was an instant game changer. All of a sudden, I'm so much more hopeful for my clients because I'm like, oh, they've already got what they're looking for too. They just don't realize it. So immediately, my impact with my clients started going through the roof. It was just like an overnight thing. And again, this is stuff we'd heard before. I was an NLP trainer. So we had this idea of everyone's already got all the resources they need already within them. But then we said about, okay, so how are we going to get them at that? And that sort of thing. And it just simplified everything. It's like, oh no, they've already got it. The only issue is they don't realize they've already got it. That was a game changer. Then third insight, I'm not going to tell you all. We're not going to be like the 143rd. Yeah. I'll stop at 3. But it was in June of 2009. And I suddenly, because up until that point, I thought that this was an interesting approach, an interesting methodology. And all of a sudden I realized, oh no, this is principles. This understanding is to psychology what the discovery of germs was to medicine. And in that moment, I was like, oh, game changer. Called up my office, said, we're changing direction. There's principles for psychology. This is what I'm going to be doing for the next 20 years. Did a 180, left the field of NLP, wrote my first book, Clarity, which became a #1 bestseller. Wrote my second book, Results, which became a Sunday Times bestseller. It's now 12 years I've been looking in this direction. I've been looking as hard as I can for anything that proves it wrong. And I haven't found anything yet. It's a game changer. It's a game changer. So that's the long version of this. That's the long version of the answer to the question.
It's funny. Seth and I have both been doing some coaching for a while, and we've been through some of our own programs and whatnot. But we've gotten, obviously, with the podcast and whatnot, we've gotten a little bit more serious about it, taking some additional learning. And I do find that as you take in some of that coaching experience, it unlocks something in your perception of the world. Like I've always listened to, and we've talked about it on the podcast before. There's a show that I always listen to, Under the Influence, that talks about marketing psychology. There's just all these little pieces of things that are apparent in my life, and I never connected them until I started the coaching journey. I'm hoping that maybe one day I'll be the one having the conversation where I say, yeah, I've been doing this for 20 years now, and I've got a couple of best-selling books, and hoping to piece some things together like that. But it's incredible to me how many people step out of their traditional roles and they pursue something like coaching, and it just something in their brain instantly clicks and they start connecting with things they already have inside them. Like you're talking about for clarity, they start connecting all of those pieces and realizing that there's something more.
I really like that way of putting it. And the way it looks to me, and this will probably sound odd to people who are listening, but one of my favorite books is the book Anti-Fragile by the author Nassim Taleb. And it was where I got a way of thinking about this, which is that while our conscious minds are geared for additive approaches, so like if you look at any magazine, it'll have on the clickbait covers 7 tips for a tidy house, or 5 keys to 6-pack abs, or 4 secrets to red hot sex, or the 7 foods you have to eat to lose weight while you sleep, or whatever it might be, right? Yeah. It's additive advice. And what we do, we see that with that's exactly what I need. And we get our 5 tips and we read them. And every single one of them, we're like, oh yeah, no, that's so obvious. And then we don't apply them, because while they're sort of like sugar or crack cocaine or whatever, they're very Moorish. They don't actually connect with our deeper reality. Like a way of thinking about it is people are always doing what makes sense to them at their current level of understanding. So whatever their embodied understanding of life is, that's what they're going to do, right? If you say, hey, why don't you do this good idea? Well, you've had it, right? So you've got some problem or challenge or whatever. Someone says, oh, why don't you just do this? And you're like, yeah, and then you don't do it because you don't have an embodied understanding of it. Well, the thing that makes people change is insight. They get an embodied understanding of life that allows them to do the new thing. But insight is subtractive. It actually takes things off your mind. It gives you less to think about. So the way I think about these principles and what we share with people is like, how people have a lot on their mind, like everything with social media and information. We teach this simple understanding that allows you to take things off your mind automatically, like without meditating or without medication or any of that stuff. It clears your mind automatically so you can focus on the job at hand and do the stuff that matters to you and that sort of thing. That's what I mean by subtractive psychology. It's something that takes stuff off your mind automatically.
You were mentioning having an insight, and it took me back. So just about 3 years ago, I'm sitting in the parking lot of a hotel in Vancouver, and I had just started a bit of a personal wellness journey. I was, probably 6 months into it at that point, and I'd lost some weight, gone to the gym, starting to feel good about myself, improving my relationships. Things were headed in a good direction, but I was still had this drinking. Drinking has always been an issue for me as I was coming up, and the reason why, a couple of reasons why. One of them was anyone who hung around me when I had a drink would see me turn bright red. Like I had some sort of alcohol sensitivity, and I just kind of ignored it because I thought that in order to be successful in business and to have friends and to, have, effective relationships and go to sporting events, you needed to drink. Like I just thought like that's part of the gig. And so I just sort of ignored all the things that it was doing to me personally and kept drinking. But there I was, I'm 32 years old at that time, and I'm hungover, and I've got to go to a meeting, and I just feel like shit, and I had been feeling like shit. And as much as I was working out, I wasn't seeing the benefits, and I was just like, you know what? I'm done. That's it. And I've never taken another drink since then. I just decided in that parking lot, in that moment, I was done. And I wrote a list of like 7 or 8 things of all the reasons why I was done. And I made sure in my head, I don't know if I made sure, but in my head, I'm like, I'm not quitting because my wife wants me to, or because anyone thinks that I should. I'm quitting because I don't want to drink anymore. Like I'm done. It's not serving me, and I'm moving on with my life. And I don't know, like for me, I didn't need a support group. I didn't need counseling. I didn't need any, I just stopped, and I've never gone back, and I've never even had an urge. People are like, oh, it must be so hard. I've literally never had an urge ever to have a drink. I'm just like, I'm done. And the moment, that was like the moment of the insight. And then the moment I knew that I could do it was I was helping my friend start a business, and we flew down to Detroit. And we met with the CEO of this company who wanted to sort of buy our idea or whatever. And so we're in like his penthouse suite in, I think it was Dearborn or something. Like it's like we're this fancy area of Detroit, and he's got his private wine cellar, and he's pouring glasses of wine for everyone. He's like, here you go. And I'm only like 3 weeks into it at this point. And I was just like, no, thanks. And I knew in that moment that I was good. And all of it was in my mind, Jamie. Like, that's the thing that blows my mind. Like, I don't know. I don't know if that sparks anything for you. I know you kind of had, I think, a similar insight at some point, and I just wanted to share that and kind of see where you went with it.
Well, I love your story, Seth, because what it speaks to is actually like all over the world, there are people who have managed to stop drinking in a way that's healthy, natural, all that stuff for them. And what I'm going to assert is that it's always the same thing that does that, which is they have an insight, they have a realization from within. And so all of a sudden, the thing that made sense yesterday doesn't make sense anymore. Well, and things that didn't make sense yesterday suddenly do, like whether it's, well, I'm going to suggest that that's always the thing that creates change. Now, people may have those insights while they're going to AA meetings, or while they're going to therapy, or while they're off on holiday, or while they go for a long walk, or the context where they have those realizations can change. But the thing that, they may go, okay, I'm going to give you an example. I decided 2 years ago, you know what? I could do with doing yoga. I'm going to do 30 days of yoga, even though it's kind of, I'm terrible at it. I prefer to do things I'm good at. I'm going to do like a yoga with Adrienne. I'm going to do 30 days of yoga.
I did that as well.
I do my 30 days of yoga, and I don't know when it happened, but at some point in that, it suddenly made sense to keep doing it. So I've been doing it ever since. This is 2 years. 2 years I've been doing that. Now, it didn't make sense to me to do it a week before. It made sense to me to do the 30 days of it, but I had no plans to do any more of that. But at some point in that 30 days, something shifted, and it suddenly made sense to me to do that. Well, it looks to me, Seth, like that's what happened to you. You'd been going through whatever you'd been going through, and at a certain point you went, oh, this is going to stop. I'm not going to drink anymore. Then you thought, okay, I'll write out this list of stuff. I'll be clear with myself about why I'm doing it and why I'm not doing it and that sort of thing. And then how you perceive the world has now shifted. Well, what I'm going to suggest is that real and sustainable change, however it looks for people, is always driven by the same mechanism. If a person's embodied understanding of life hasn't upgraded or updated to include the new behavior, they'll do it for a bit and then they'll backslide. Because it didn't make sense to them to continue. So what you've described has all the hallmarks of a lasting and sustainable change. It's a shift rather than just getting yourself to do it or something like that. So I love it.
I feel like it's almost like a hard entry point. Like there's two ways you can go. You can go the soft way where you try to force yourself into change by doing small things that other people might be doing that probably aren't the right thing for you, but you heard that they're great, and so you're going to try them. The 7 steps for rock hard abs. Your titles were great, by the way. I think you were probably you missed your calling.
Have I got a career in lead magnets?
Yeah, exactly. But I feel like those sort of soft approaches almost never do anything, because you have to eventually have that hard entry point, even with those steps.
I think it can, though. Like, it depends. I think where my mind goes to, sorry, Jamie, I wanted to jump in there. Like, I just read the relationship handbook. Dr. Jack Pransky, I think, wrote that one.
George Pransky.
George Pransky, yeah. That's it. Yeah. And the thing in that book that blew my mind was the concept of you can change your mind like that. Like, like literally the perception is it takes a long time to change, but change actually happens in an instant, in a second, in an insight. Whether you do the micro habit, like you try the 7 thing, you could still find an insight in there. The point is, like, just when you find that insight, like,
Well, in a way, I think you're both saying the same thing, believe it or not, because my take on this anyway is the only thing that ever makes a difference in someone's life in a sustainable way is that moment of insight, that shift in their perceptual area. Now, that shift can happen in a darkened parking lot after an all-nighter. It can happen while reading 7 top tips. It can happen while deciding to do 30 days of yoga. It can happen. I mean, if you ever read Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, he was being route marched across a frozen field by Nazi prison guards. He was a prisoner of war. He was in a concentration camp, and he was barefoot and on the brink of death. And he fell to the ground. And one of his colleagues was trying to get him to get back up because they knew that if he stayed lying on the ground, he'd be shot or kicked to death. That would be the end of it. So he's lying there and he can't get up. He suddenly has an insight, and he realized that the one freedom that could never be taken away from him was his ability to make his own meaning of the situation. And he suddenly is filled up with filled up with the spirit and that sort of thing. He gets back up, and it keeps him going for the rest of the war till he's released. And he goes on to found the field of logotherapy and to write books and to have a total calling. Now, he had that insight on the verge of being kicked to death by a Nazi prison camp guard. So there are no conditions that have to be there before someone can have a life-changing insight. The power is in realizing that the power's in the insight, not in the 7 steps or the car park or the frozen wasteland or the 30 days of practice or whatever it might be. That capacity for insight and realization is there within you, it's there within me, it's there within everyone. And the more we're able to attribute that to where the power actually is. And here's the thing. We live in a world where our attention is being pointed elsewhere. It's being pointed to the 7 top tips or to this brilliant course or to that, whatever it might be, when actually the power's in each one of us. That's the move as far as I see it.
And our world is ever pointing us. Like I can only imagine that since you started on this journey, like in the 20 years, there has been significant change in the amount of us getting pointed in directions that are just distractions.
Well, it's so funny, I wrote my first book, Clarity, over 10 years ago, and the second edition is coming out next year. So I'm looking back at the introduction of the book Clarity, and the kind of the theme of the intro is that with everything from apps to social media to, the information revolution, was interesting that the opening to the book, the first quote in the book is from a guy called Herbert Simon. He said, what information consumes is obvious. What information consumes is our attention. So the information revolution, by definition, carries with it a voracious appetite for our attention. And when I wrote Clarity 10 years ago, I was pointing that out. It's like, man, this is really full on. Well, 10 years down the line, it's like, are you kidding me? I didn't know how good I had it 10 years ago. Now I've got like, whatever it is, TikTok and metaverse and Oculus and all that sort of stuff. Well, it's very hypnotic and it's very engrossing. And the big social media companies are just marshaling the most incredible AI powers to draw our attention in and to engage us and all that sort of stuff. And so I think it's never been more important than ever to just really understand what we've got going for us, and that we can kind of take ownership of our attention again.
I think you referenced it as far as information goes as salt water. That clicked for me when you were talking about how it's salt water to quench your thirst. You're just going to continue to be thirsty.
Yeah, that's for sure.
That one takes me back. We had a guest on the pod last season, a fellow by the name of Walter Vandervelde, and he's a professor in Belgium. And he did a TED talk on the most important future skills in the workplace. And what I loved about it is he sort of distilled it down to these 5 skills that I think anybody could understand and start to work on. But one of them that was just like a nuanced, different version of time management was attention management.
Yeah.
And that, I don't know if it was like a paradigm shift for me, but it was like, oh, attention management. That makes like, that's what I'm managing here. Cause you can't manage time. And like, it's such a buzzword, but it's like, I can manage my attention. And all of a sudden I can come up with like plans and strategies and be like, okay, like I'm onto something. So that to me, it was just like a simple word change, similar meaning, but that one word change just totally shifted how I saw that whole part of myself.
Makes total sense to me. Do you remember what the other 4 were?
Creativity, critical thinking, social intelligence, attention management, and self-management.
Yeah, I agree with all of those. It looks to me like the principles behind clarity underpin all 5 of them. It's funny, the Institute for the Future produces lists of future work skills and that sort of thing, and they came up with their version of that list a few years ago, and then a couple of years later they said, "Oh, we forgot one. We overlooked one," and the one they'd overlooked was resilience. And the prevailing idea is that you need to teach resilience, but the fact of the matter is, we have resilience built in. We've already got it. It's there at the heart of our being. And the only thing that gets in our way is the belief that we don't have it. And it's like that with so many of these qualities. Like I can't tell you how many people come to me because they want coaching on confidence, when actually what they describe as confidence is really just a lack of insecurity. You know, if you speak to any, like I'll bet you guys have people listening to this podcast who think, man, I wish I was confident enough to do a podcast, or wish I had enough self-belief or whatever. I've been doing podcasts for years, and I know self-belief and confidence have nothing to do with it. It's like you'd show up and you do your work, and you don't need to feel a certain way to show up and do a podcast. You don't need to feel a certain way to write a chapter in a book. And so these ideas that we need to develop confidence or develop resilience or even develop self-belief, they look like phantoms to me. They're illusions. You've actually got all that stuff inside of you, and all you need to do is kind of get rid of the stuff that's been getting in the way of it.
Well, and I don't know if that was Sydney Banks's main insight, but if I recall the story, it's something like he's walking along the beach with someone and he said how insecure he was, and then it got reflected back to him, you're not insecure, you just think you are, or something like that. Like, if you just like slow your brain down and just think about that for a second, it's like, oh, like, and that could be applied to anything we think. But I do think that, you know, if I think of this podcast as that example, I was out for a walk and I was thinking, and it just came to me, and it was just there. And I was like, I should do a podcast. Hey, I know a guy that knows how to do radio stuff. I'm going to call JP. And like all these dots just started connecting together, all from a thought in the moment. And I could have overthought it and been like, oh, I don't know how to do a podcast. I'll never be able to do a good one, or like what. But I didn't.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if that happened at some point, or that certainly happens for lots of successful people. They have the idea and they start doing stuff. Then they get insecure and then they just keep going anyway. And it all works out.
I could talk about this all day long. And maybe we take it to like clarity. So like the you know, for the people who like a nice formula and the math, clarity equals capacity minus contaminated thinking or contamination. What is, like, if you kind of take that down a level, what does capacity mean? Like what are the roots of capacity?
Well, my assertion is that we're all born with an innate capacity for peace of mind, for well-being, for security, for love and connection, for presence, for confidence, for resilience, for happiness, for joy. These are innate capacities, you know. They're so easy a baby can do them. You know, so they're built in. They're built in. And here's the funny thing. There are certain things which aren't built in, like how to do a podcast isn't built in. How to use an Excel spreadsheet or ride a bike or paint a good painting or play the guitar. Those aren't built-in capacities. Those are learned skills. The ability to learn them, that's built in. So learning is an innate capacity. So these are innate capacities, but all too often in our society, people treat those innate capacities as though they're skills to be developed. You know, you could, if you type how to be happy into Google, you'll see lots of people, well-meaning people, teaching people, here are the things you need to do and practice in order to be happy. Or how do you have more love in your relationship? Oh, well, you need to buy flowers, or you need to do this, or you need to do that. It's like, no, you've got that stuff that's built in. Love, connection, happiness, resilience, peace, joy, security. It's built in. So the power is in A, knowing what you got going for you, knowing that it's built in. And then B, just having an eye to what it is that gets in the way of it. Like, because a way to think of those innate capacities is sort of like I'm in Nottingham in the UK right now. And so it was sunny earlier, but right now it's cloudy. So actually it's sunny all day, but just sometimes there are clouds in the way. But the sun's still there. The sun hasn't gone away. The sun was, in fact, even last night, in the middle of the night when it was pitch black, the sun was still just doing its thing. The sun's still there. We're just, there's a planet in the way at night. And so there's nothing you need to do in order to make the sun be there. The sun's already there. You don't have to put the sun in the sky. The sun's already in the sky. And the source of the love and the joy and the peace and the clarity and the confidence and the resilience and all of that stuff, the security and the well-being, the source of that is already there at the heart of your being. You don't need to put it there. It's already there. It's already there. And in fact, the attempt to put it there is what has people, the belief that it isn't there and they need to go find it and put it there. That's what's causing a lot of heartache, a lot of mental health challenges. If you were to ask me to give the kind of the root identifying symptom of the vast majority of, everyday mental health challenges people have, it would be the belief that there's something wrong, that there's something missing, that they don't have that. I mean, I bet there's people even listening to this right now saying, oh yeah, that's a nice idea, but I don't have that. I don't have that source of peace and love and security within me. Or if I had that, why don't I experience it? Why am I, stressed or worried or bothered or whatever it might be? But the only thing that ever gets in the way of it is the two simple misunderstandings. Number one, how our experience is created, which is kind of what the teddy bear video is about. Basically, our experience is created from within, but we live in a world where it seems like it's coming from outside. That's a trick of the mind. It's really, really natural. It seems like it's coming from outside, but it's actually coming from within. That's the first misunderstanding. And the second is people have a misunderstanding of who they really are. They think that who they really are is, their body or their personality or their grades or their bank balance or their height or whatever it might be. But actually, who you are is that source of clarity and peace and resilience and well-being that resides at the heart of your being. And it's there in everyone. And it's there in you, and it's there in me. It's there in everyone listening to this. And we all lose sight of it. We all overlook that. We all run the risk of getting caught up in, whatever's going on day to day.
I think one of the things that folks often default to is they talk about their environment. They talk about, I grew up in this environment and therefore I don't have that in my toolkit, or I don't have that skill set, or I don't have that same capacity as someone else. So how would you handle that conversation when someone says, I grew up in I grew up in the Bronx versus I grew up on the on the right side of the tracks, and I had all of this enabled for me.
Yeah, well, I have the huge advantage of having worked with a lot of people who grew up on the wrong side of the tracks and a lot of people who grew up on the right side of the tracks. And some of the people who grew up on the wrong side of the tracks were doing great, and some people who grew up on the right side of the tracks were really struggling, and vice versa. So I've seen so I know it's not that. I know it's not that, but the way I approach someone in that situation or in any situation, like the first thing is to acknowledge the reality, which is that our patterns for how we understand life and engage with life, they did get laid down in the past. Like that's where we learned, that's where we built our models for life, our models for the world and that sort of thing. That's where we kind of built our game plan for life and our best shot at how does life actually work. So we built it in the past. Where else are we going to build it? So I'll acknowledge that. But what I then do is with anyone, regardless of what their presenting challenge is or whatever it might be, my starting point is to do my best to get their world. I want to understand how it looks to them. I don't know if you've ever heard of the concept of a straw man. But there's another concept called a steel man, which is if you're going to steel man someone, you're building the best possible version of their argument that they would sign off on. And I see it almost like that I'm looking to understand their world so well that they would sign off on it, that they would go, hey, you get me.
What popped into my head was I heard this story about the Wright brothers. Their neighbors used to complain about all the yelling, but it's not the yelling you would think it is, because they actually had a policy where they would argue totally openly for 20 minutes, and then they would actually take the other person's perspective, and they would have to argue for whatever the other person's perspective was to try and convince themselves that the other person was right. And it's a very interesting approach. I imagine it, caused a lot of stress in their lives, but it was a very interesting approach.
Well, here's the funny thing. So when I sit down with a client, and you can imagine, I'll have clients coming to me with really significant business challenges they're trying to solve, people who have often mental health challenges or addiction problems or that sort of thing. My starting point is I want to get their world. I want to understand how they see reality, and I want to understand it well enough that they'll sign off on it. And so my sweet spot with a client is they're like, you get me. You get me. They feel gotten. They feel fully understood. Because what I found is that once you really get your client's world and they feel genuinely understood, they kind of relax and they feel safe. And my metaphor for it is like what I want to do with my client, because I know that the solution to whatever has been bothering them, before they hire me, they've tried everything, right? So the solution to whatever they need, it's not going to be found in their existing understanding of the world, right? So I want to get what's their existing understanding of the world, because it's not going to be in there. So I want to know what that looks like. And my metaphor for it is it's sort of like their understanding of the world is sort of like a raft that they're floating through the river of life on. And so I want to climb onto that raft with them, and I want to have a good look around it, see where the edges are. And I'm very interested in the edges because they don't know what's out there beyond the edges of the raft. And so when I know where the edges are, I'll grab them by the shoulder and we'll jump into the water. And when they climb out of the water, back onto the raft has changed. And so if I use Seth's example of his insight that he wasn't going to drink anymore, that was off the edge of the raft that he'd been living on the previous day. Like he had a new raft from that day. And what I'm looking to do in all my coaching is I want to create the conditions for people to have those exact kind of insights that Seth had. I know that they have the capacity for that. And so I'm kind of betting the farm on their capacity for insight. The thing I found makes that most likely to happen is if I really get their world and kind of follow my curiosity into the unknown with them.
I love that. I work for a coach I'm working with a coach who worked with one of your students, as I understand it.
Yeah.
So Justin Perkins. He's he was based in Colorado, but he just moved to Germany, I think. But he worked for he did some work with Ankish, who was one of your folks. And it's funny how when you like sit back and you think of all the things that need to happen in the world for two people to connect, like it's crazy. But we had just moved out to this new place, and we had neighbors that moved in like a couple days later. And I met this guy, and he's like, "Oh, you have a podcast? That's cool. You should meet my friend." And so he hooks me up with Justin, and we have this Zoom call like this about him coming on the podcast. And we've still never talked about him coming on the podcast because we just connected. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to. It was just he just saw me, and we just ended up having this conversation. And I'm like, I have to work with this person. Like I don't know why, but like it's there. And when we've talked about like what happened in those conversations, and it was curiosity. Like just genuinely, he got on my raft with me and he's like, "What's going on here? What is that?" Double clicked on a couple of things, and I just felt something I've never felt before, where it's like, I need to make this investment in myself. And I think up to that point, when I thought about coaching, it was like, you're paying the coach. And this is, I think, I don't know, I just kind of want to vibe with you on this. It's like, oh, I'm paying the coach. Like, that seems like I'm not going to pay someone to do something that I can figure out on my own. But it was like, in order to find this next level of myself, this person gets me, and I'm willing to invest like this more than I've invested in anything that wasn't a house or a car to figure that out and go down that journey. But it like, I think the crazy thing for me, Jamie, was like, it wasn't even about the money. Like that didn't even matter. It was just like, I just need to go down this path and learn and go on this journey. And it was all because he got on the raft with me. All of it.
Yeah. It looks essential to me because that feeling you had, that sense you had that he was there with you and could see something that's possible for you, or more importantly, could allow you to see that there's something possible for you, even if you couldn't put words to what it was. Like, I know for me, when I've hired a coach or gone on a program, it's often been because there's something here for you. Not exactly sure what it is, but I can feel that it's that next step is there. So I totally get what you're talking about. And the curiosity and the kind of sense of connection and really being heard and listened to, it's very, very powerful. Got to tell you guys, I mean, because I know all kinds of different people listen to your podcast, that same set of qualities I found to be completely invaluable when it comes to sales and enrolling clients. Because if you're willing to really, really listen to someone and get their world and find out what their heart's desire is and what they're wanting to have happen, your chances of presenting something to them that's going to be a no-brainer yes, and it really goes up. So it seems to me like a really valuable, it's just a really valuable skill set for anyone who wants to just have more impact with the people you're in connection with.
Thanks for joining us for this special 2-part conversation with Jamie Smart. Remember to hit subscribe or follow and join us again next week as we continue the conversation in part 2. You can also join the discussion on our social media pages with @Biz Dojo Podcast and search for the Biz Dojo on LinkedIn. Of course, if you're curious about what coaching can do for you, connect with us for a free consultation and discovery session. Just email coaching@thebizdojo.com.